Walls, by the way, are extremely important. If cells did not have walls, we would not exist. If you didn't have a wall around you, your skin basically, you would be very sick and you would be very, very susceptible to very much attack from this world around us. Our walls in our spiritual life are just as important for us to make sure that they maintain, because the enemy loves to bring down walls in us. So we are going to be preaching on all through this period of time about how to build those walls in our lives, that we may rebuild the things that have been broken down, and that we might strengthen the things that exist. And so today we're doing a principle of getting excited about the right things. See, whenever Nehemiah heard about the walls being torn down around Jerusalem, he got excited about the right thing. He saw very clearly that wall needed to be rebuilt, that it needed a strong wall, because in that period of time, walls actually did hold out the enemy. Now we've got bombs and we've got ways of blowing up walls and things like that. But they didn't have that during that period of time. A wall would stop an arrow very well. Walls were extremely important. If you didn't have that, if you tried to amass wealth in a community like that, then the enemy would come in and take it very easily from you. You had to have walls. So he got excited about, hey, I need to build this wall and build it strong. And we need to do the same thing in our lives. We need to take a look at our lives, our spiritual lives, and see what areas of our lives need to be strengthened and need to be enhanced. And the gates of our lives need to be reinforced. And those parts of our walls that the enemy has been able to break down. And some of those walls, by the way, were broken down when you were children. And you may not even be aware of those walls and the hurt that came into your life and the damage that went to the way you think. And so you grab a hold of those things and say, God, I need to be able to build this wall, that I be a spiritually strong individual for you. And so that's what we're doing as we go through this. The first thing that we come to is in Nehemiah chapter 2. The cupbearer has a choice that he has to make. In Nehemiah 1:11 it says this. Today, he's praying. This is the end of his prayer in chapter 1. He says, today, grant him, he's talking about himself, compassion before this man. And all of a sudden, it's this thing where he's talking about this man, and you don't know what he's talking about. And then he says, I was a cupbearer to the king. He was a cupbearer to the king. There's a very important position that he had. This is the king. That is an amazing fellow that he was. This king of the Persian Empire. I'm going to show a map up here fairly soon. It's not there yet. It'll be down toward the end. But it's a map of the territory that this king covers. And he is the cupbearer. That means that he has a daily contact with the king of this huge, massive area that he rules. And so he had great influence. And he became a friend of this man that is also the king of Persia. This king, his name is Artaxerxes. He is the son of Xerxes. That's not the guy that works on your car. You know, those are called Zerts. So he's not that guy. But he was a king that was really powerful. He was expanding the Persian Empire greatly. He's the one that went against Sparta and Athens and Thermopylae, that big war that they had there, and he lost that battle. Well, this is the son of Xerxes. He came into power because his father was assassinated by kind of like the Grand Vizier, who blamed it on his older brother, who should have been king. And so they killed the older brother because he was falsely accused of killing his own father. And then they found out it was the other guy, and they killed him. And so he came into power like that. Now, this Artaxerxes appears to be a very important individual to the nation of Israel, not to Israel, but to the nation of Persia, because he was very, very a good one compared to all the other emperors of their territory. He was very listening to people. He was really trying to do what was right and good. Now, when you say that, you have to realize that he was still this king over this huge area. He also could do things that were really, really bad in the process. There's a story of him that there was out hunting after lions, and this lion was going to attack the Artaxerxes, and one of his companions killed the lion to save him from being attacked by the lion. But he made a mistake as he killed the lion. He shouldn't kill the lion. He should have allowed the king to kill the lion. And the king got upset because he wasn't allowed to kill the lion. He wanted to kill the lion. So he was going to kill the guy because he saved his life. You know, it's kind of that type of a thing that goes on with these people. So you never know what these kings are going to do. So when he's going to go before this king, even though he is his cupbearer, he's taken a risk. One of the rules of being a cupbearer is you were never to show that you were sad in the presence of the king. I mean, you are in the presence of the king. You should be always happy because you're able to serve the king. And so it's a really risky thing that he's going to do. He was the cupbearer, and he also had power available to him because he was able to influence that king. And he also had the trust of the king. But he was in great danger as he did. And here's the picture of the territory that you see there. It contains all of Afghanistan, part of all of Pakistan, the western portion of, well, it is just Pakistan now, and then a lot of India as well. And then you go the other way, it's all of Turkey, Egypt, Iran, Iraq. All that territory was under his power and his strength. And so this is the situation that Nehemiah was in. But he was willing to take the risk. And in taking this risk, he spent his time praying beforehand, the prayer and fasting beforehand, and he comes to the place where he's going to be serving the king on that way. And so in Nehemiah 2, 1 through 2, it says this, "And it came about in the month of Nisan, that's not an automobile, by the way, in the 20th year of the king, Artaxerxes, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, 'Why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart.' Then I was very much afraid." And that's what we're talking about. He was in danger at that point in time, because if the king took not a liking to that whole process, he would be toast. And so he gave his he knew that he was in a bad situation. So he was going to get the king's attention. And so he said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies desolate and its gates have been consumed by fire?" He probably knew the things that were important to the king, and so he mentioned those things. The thing that probably got the king's attention is that my father's tombs were in danger here. Why should I not be? This city that my father's tombs are there. And kings were really concerned about not only their fathers and their forefathers as far as being honored. They're looking to their own place. If you take a look at the tomb of Artaxerxes, it's a huge thing that they carved inside of a mountain. And so he's looking at his death as well. So the tombs are important to him in the process. And so he gets the interest of the king there. But then it says that he's going to do something that is really important for us to grab a hold of in our own lives. As he's practicing the presence of God. He knows enough about God to know that, as Paul says, in him we move and breathe and have our being. That God is there, God is around him. And this is the audacious thing that Nehemiah does, is he is audacious before God to assume that God is going to use him to accomplish God's will. And so this is what he says in verse 4 of Nehemiah chapter 2. "Then the king said to me, 'What would you request?' So I prayed to the God of heaven." Now, when he says that, you take a look at that and you say, well, what does he do? Drop down on his knees and go into a long prayer before God? No, he's not doing that. See, he already knows that he's already prepared the way through his prayers. He spent his time on fasting and praying. He got before God, and he knows that God is there. And this is a quick prayer to God. This is not a long, protracted prayer. This is a quick prayer. He looks to God, "God, help." Have you been in a situation where you need to say, "God, help"? I know one time I was driving down the road I was driving the speed limit, and I really was. I was driving the speed limit. But the problem was it was in the middle of a blizzard. And not a wise thing to do in the middle of a blizzard to drive the speed limit. You're supposed to drive less than the speed limit. And eventually what happened, my tires got loose. And I started going down the road at 55 miles an hour. That's when the 55-mile-an-hour zone was on there. See, I was driving the speed limit. And I was going down the road, spinning down the road at 55 miles an hour in the middle of the night. And the only thing I had time to do was say, Jesus. But he heard me. They who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. And I was, it was just totally amazing. Whenever my vehicle finally stopped, it got a little damaged in the process, but I was in a place. If I got off of the wrong place, I'd been dead. There were huge blocks of lava that were all around. And anyway, I stopped at the perfect place, and I looked around myself, and there on my lap was my Bible. And I don't know how it got on my lap, but I knew it was God speaking to me. I'm the one that saved you. Call upon the name of the Lord and you shall be saved. Those are quick prayers. Sometimes you don't have time to pray a long, protracted prayer. Sometimes it's just, God, I know you're here. I need you. I know you're here. I need you. And he is here. Where two or three are gathered together, where is he? In our midst. So God is here with us all the time, every time. And a quick prayer is just as good as a long one, as long as your heart is prepared before him. And so he says, I prayed to the God of heaven. See, God is ever with us. This is not a time for protracted prayer, but is a quick look at his God and who he has laid hold of through prayer. This reminds me out of this situation with Moses. When Moses is standing before the Red Sea and the Egyptian army has been let loose by the fire of God and they're coming at him, and you got the sea on the other side, and Moses is talking to his people. And so God says to Moses, this very interesting thing in Exodus 14:15, it says this, Then the Lord said to Moses, Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. There's a time for prayer and there's a time for action. And you got to get the right order in the process. You get that prayer down. You talk to God about men, and then you talk to men about God. And that's where the process is. We go first to God and we say, God, I need your help to accomplish these things. But at some point in time, there's a time for action. There's not a time for sitting back and saying, I got to keep on praying about this. God says, no, now's the time for action. You go and you do. There's a time for praying and there's a time for doing. And he was at the time of doing at this point in time. So he asked the big question of the king. This is the big thing. What's going to happen? This is it. This is going to be the thing that makes it or breaks it, is if the king is responsive to this question, then indeed he will be able to go and have success with this man. He said to the king in verse 5, he says this, If it please the king, and if your servant has found favor before you, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. So he asked the king to do that. Now, this is really interesting what we find going on from here on out. This is things that you don't see written in the Scripture, but you can understand from what it is written in the Scripture. It is obvious that Nehemiah, during that time of prayer and fasting that he had before he went before the king, that he laid out a plan, a strategy. First of all, he had to get the king's attention. Second of all, he had to get the king's permission. But he knew that the king was going to ask some questions before he was able to grant him these things. And he thought through those questions the king was going to ask. And so we find out in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 6, he says this, Then the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, How long will your journey be, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite time. So he already ahead of time, he couldn't spontaneously say, oh, well, it'll take me. No, he had to give. He was a man of action, a man that had laid out plans. And he knew exactly, this is how long it's going to take me to do this, O king. And this is how long it may take me, and I'll be back after I'm done with that. He had it laid out for the king. He knew the king was going to ask that. Then in verse 7 through 8, it says this, And I said to the king, If it please the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, and a keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress, which is by the temple, for the wall of the city, and for the house which I will go. And the king granted them to me, because the good hand of my God was on me. So you see what he did is he already anticipated the king's questions, but he also knew ahead of time what resources that he was going to have to ask the king for in order to accomplish his goals. And so he asked the king to accomplish these things for him. He had it already planned out. He already knew what was going on because of that special time of prayer that he had with God as he laid out that strategy. We might remember this situation where Jesus talks about building a tower, and he says, don't start on the tower unless you know you can finish it. And that's exactly what Nehemiah was doing, is he knew how he's going to go about this. If he got the king's ear on this, then this is going to have to happen, and this is going to have to happen, and this is going to have to happen. He had it laid out. There's nothing wrong with you using the sound mind that God has given you to lay out a strategy for accomplishing the rebuilding of the walls of your life. If you need some things in your life, you just say, God, I want you to rebuild the wall of my life. It's not going to get rebuilt. God's going to say, you're going to have to be the one that is going to go after it, because I'm going to use you to accomplish the rebuilding of your life. And so you've got to get involved with this thing. You've got to lay out a strategy. If you've got a wall, like for an example, a wall of addiction that is there, you're going to have to lay out a strategy. How are you going to approach that? And what is the enemy going to do when you're trying to say, no, I'm not going to be addicted to this stuff anymore? And you're going to have an answer to that, and what resources that you'll need to pull in order for you to stay against that. I know many of us struggle with our eating. Anybody do that? It is a struggle. And I just tried, I'll just do a lot more exercise. You know what I learned is that the generally way that you have to lose weight is the more you put in, the more you gain. It's very simple. But if you put in less, then you lose. And so, it's just not exercise. You put out more, but if you put in more, you're still going to gain weight. That's a terrible thing, to learn. If I put out more, then I can eat more. No, it doesn't work that way. You got to put in less. And so that's the general process. And so there has to be called discipline that we have to lay out. And we have to lay this strategy out. How am I going to get down to the goal that I'm going to get to? I've got to do this and this and this. I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. So therefore, this is what I have to do. And so you lay out a strategy. If you're following this little plan here and you want to do a little plan there and say, hey, I want to come against this thing in my life, you're going to have to lay out a strategy of how you're going to accomplish that. What are your needs? What are the things that God's going to have to supply? What are the things that man are going to have to supply? It is an amazing thing that you do. Now, the thing about it is, you do the best that you can. You lay out the best strategy you can, and you'll still miss some things. And you know what God does? He does the rest. He does the rest. You do what you can do. You do what you think of, and all that you can accomplish, and God does that which you cannot see. Notice what it says in verse 2:9. It says, then I came to the governors and the provinces beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. Now, I don't know if he asked for those things, but I don't think he did, because we find earlier in Ezra that they were offered to him. King's escort was offered to him, and he refused it. I don't think Nehemiah asked for this. I believe he just said, God's going to take care of me in this process. But the king provided him with officers and of the army and horsemen to go along with him. I think this is a very important part of the process. He didn't know that he needed them. And it doesn't show that he needed them during the whole thing. But I believe he needed them. That God provided them through the king, even though Nehemiah didn't ask for them. And so what I'm saying is, as you lay out a strategy for rebuilding the walls of your life, getting excited with the right idea of, I want to bring this under subjection to God. I want to bring this place of my life back into right living with God. Then you do everything that you can in the process of doing that. And the things that you miss in the process, God himself will provide those things for you. So no evidence that Nehemiah asked the escort, the king provided above the request. In Ephesians 3:20 it says this, now to him who is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us. God is able to do great beyond anything that we can hope for, or think, or ask. And God is He's going to go above and beyond what you ask because He loves you that much. He's going to pour in your life resources to accomplish this. Do you know that you have everything pertaining to life and godliness, everything at your disposal? God says, I'm going to give you everything pertaining to life and godliness. You have it. Sometimes we're going to have to grab a hold of those things, know that they exist, and do it. And we do that with our heart and our soul and our mind. We grab a hold of these things and we go with them. And then those things that we don't even know that we needed, God provides those things too. I've seen it happen over and over again as we go through this life. God does the rest. Well, Nehemiah can't build this wall by himself. So he's going to have some help in the process. And so he's going to have to stir up the population. He's going to have to bring others into his vision of this rebuilt wall. So he did the first foundation thing that he needed. He had to have the king's permission. He had to have the king's resources. And so he got those things, and then he comes to his people. Now he's going to have to get them on board as well. This is the difficulty that we have in leading as far as the church is concerned, is getting everybody on board with the same vision and the same ideas in the process of doing that. But when God is in it, then there's no problem at all. It's just you have to do it in such a way as people can catch that vision. So he came to Jerusalem, verse 11, he says, so he came to Jerusalem, was there 3 days. Now, what he did during the period of time, that 3 days, is he evaluated things. It says, Nehemiah went out at night, evaluating the work that was to be done, and kept quiet until the plan had been laid. So he didn't tell anybody about it. In verse 16 it says, the officials did not know where I had gone and what I had done, nor had I as yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the rest who did the work. He didn't tell anybody. He just went to the situation and he said, okay, God, I'm needing you to give me wisdom of how we can do this. This is a big project. This is not a little wall. This is a major big wall, and it covers a lot of territory with very big gates. And we've got a few people on the inside. We don't have a huge population to do it. So we're going to have some real good wisdom here. So he went and he checked out the wall. And he evaluated that wall. And he comes back and he says, okay, what I've got to do now, the wall's not a problem. The hearts of the people are the problem. How is it that I'm going to take and give them a vision of how they can turn these walls that have been torn down and the gates that have been burnt with fire, how they can to look at that and say, we can do this. We can do this. So he's going to bring them to a vision. And so he's going to call them to that same vision. And Nehemiah 2:17 says this, then I said to them, okay, gather these leaders together. And he said to them, you see the bad situation we are in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates are burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be a reproach. Now, you look at that and you say, how is he going to convince them with just those words? Well, he doesn't just give them those words. Notice what he does in verse 18. He says, I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which had been spoken to me. Then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. So they had a bad situation. So if you have a bad situation, the wall is broken down, let's build the wall. But that's not going to capture their vision. So then what he did, he says, God did miraculous things. So then let's build the wall. Yeah, then when we see that God is in it, then we have the ability to say, I can get into this. I can lend my hand to this because God is in it. God is doing this. And I can be a part of this. When we started Antioch Christian Church again, back when 17 years ago when I came here, there was about 60 people here. When I preached on the first Sunday that I was here, where they were checking me out to see if I was insane or not, there were 60 people here. And they've been discouraged, but somebody, Dave Worthen mainly, came along and said, we can do this. We can do this. We can rebuild this thing. And So I come along, and God started doing some stuff. God doing amazing stuff. Within a few, well, by the end of December, we came in November 1st when we finally made the transition over here. By the end of December, we were running 150. I have no idea where all those people came. I knew where some of them came from. They came from the church that I was preaching down south, but we were even fewer than 50. And so, I mean, it just boom. God started doing some things, and people's hearts were lifted up. And so on we go in the process. Some things that happen that discourage us along the way, we've got to remember that God is still building the church. That God is still doing the things that he's going to do. And the same God that started us back then is going to continue on working in us. We've got to catch on to the vision of what God can do through a people that believe him. And so that is right. And then what he says, when he told him about the king and how he got involved with that, he says, we have the resources. So let's build the wall. They got a bad situation that needs a wall. They got God's affirmative action saying, I'm going to be with you to accomplish this. And then they looked around and they said, we've got the resources. There's nothing to stop us from building the wall. Is God for us? Do we have the resources to do it? Then let's rebuild the walls. Rebuild the walls of this church to strengthen and encourage one another and make sure that our families are strong and healthy and vibrant, that our kids are growing in Christ. Use that master builders, whatever we can do to cause things to happen. Amazing things can happen when people say, God is with us to accomplish this. Now, don't forget, when the enemy sees us believing him, believing God, and believing that we have the resource to accomplish it, to build into people's lives, we're going to get friction. We're going to get attacks. Like my thing says, oops, don't forget the adversary. I hope I spelled it right. Okay, but anyway, verse 219. Yeah. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Gershom the Arab heard it, they mocked us and despised us and said, what is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? They're going to start causing all sorts of trouble. Through the rest of Nehemiah, you find good old Sanballat and Tobiah are causing trouble all the way through there, trying to bring the work to halt. And whenever the work is completed, they're going to try and do some other stuff to hurt the people. And all the way through, Nehemiah is answering back to them as he answered here in verse 220. It says, so I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven will give us success. Therefore we as servants will rise and build. But you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem. Whenever you choose to do what is right and good in God's eyes, the enemy is going to start attacking you. When you start and say, I'm going to live my life for Christ, the enemy is going to start attacking you. When you say, I'm going to bring down these walls that are bad walls in my life, these fortresses that the enemy has placed in my life, I'm going to bring them down. Make sure you know that as you do so, the enemy is going to rise up and he's going to accuse you, going to stir up trouble in your life, going to cause you difficulty, and he's going to accuse you of being worthless and not able to do these things. And you're going to have to come back and say, God is with me. God is with me. I know that this wall, this horrendously bad wall that keeps me from being a good, solid believer in the Lord Jesus Christ is going to come down. If it is addiction, it's going to come down. If it's an emotional disorder, it's going to come down. And whatever it is in my life that needs to be destroyed and then need to be rebuilt with solid, good stuff, it's going to happen because my God will grant me success. We are going to arise and build solid, healthy, vibrant lives that are going to give honor to God and going to be that which is going to be a hallmark for the rest of the world. And people will look at you and say, you belong to Jesus because I see Jesus in you. I see Jesus doing this mighty work. They'll see you as you fight these issues in your life. They're going to see it in you, and they're going to be amazed that you're going to stick with it And you're going to go to the end of the process until you are solidly, brilliantly glowing on that great and glorious day whenever you stand before your Maker, and you'll be like Jesus because you'll see Jesus just as he is. That's the day I'm looking forward to. But until then, I'm going to be rebuilding the wall of my life. I know there's parts of it that are just weaknesses. I've been at this for 40 years. I'm older than that, but I didn't come to Christ until I was 20. So I've been at this for a while. And a lot of things, good things have happened in my life. And I'm different than what I've been when you wouldn't like me. You wouldn't even pay any attention to me because I'd have hidden from you back before I came to Christ. But God has done things in my life, and I'm strong in some areas, but I know that I've got weaknesses in others. You're the same way. You are the same way. We are all in this together. And we can help each other build the walls, because we'll find out that what happens when we're building walls is we come alongside of each other and we start building together. And if we're building together, we'll build a strong, healthy, vibrant church. No question about it. Let's pray. Father, thank you so very much for Nehemiah to inspire us, to strengthen us and encourage us to come against our own selves, that we might be able to, hey, I can do this, Lord. I can build this wall. I can build it. I can be strong again. I can live for Christ. And it'll be a glorious time. Oh, Lord, thank you for the power of your word that is able to transform our hearts, our minds, and our thinking.